But I'd have to ruminate more on that one. So I'm going to go on to the next one. Next question is, how do you manage spending your own savings on a business? At what point do you begin fundraising? So I had kind of I think I had it pretty good when starting User Voice in that if you went to college in kind of the early zeros, which I guess is what we're calling it, for whatever reason, they gave you all sorts of credit cards. And I think by the time I was starting User Voice, even though I don't think I'd ever made in a year more than 60K, I had something like $35,000 in like credit card line of credit, which is, you know, by modern standards, it's just like ludicrous, but welcome to the mid 2000s. So the way we built User Voice was, you know, a lot of it was on, you know, I would save any cash I had to pay rent because you can't pay rent with a credit card, unfortunately. And I put everything else on the credit card. The other way we did it was, Lance and I, like I said, we used to do freelancing. And so we'd do 3 months of freelancing to fund 3 months of a startup idea. And then if the startup idea didn't take off, then we went back and did 3 months of freelancing. And so the interesting thing about this is it created kind of this constraint where we had to constrain our ideas down into something that could be built and kind of launched and tested, at least in a minimal, you know, a small group within 3 months. And so User Voice was actually the second iteration of this. The first iteration of this was kind of expansion of what we were trying to do with SwimTimer. But we eventually found out that we weren't really going to ever be able to get to the next step with that without spending at least 6 or 8 months building out the MVP. There's so many things that need to be built for that product to take off. So that alone is why we didn't go further with it. User Voice, like I said, we built User Voice in a month. We were able to test it in another month, and by the 3rd month, we had raised some angel funding for it. But that was kind of a good sustainable model, right? So we never were worried about running out of money. And once something did take off, then we were committing to it once it had some traction as well. However, the downside to this was User Voice took, after launch and things like this, it still took another about 8 months, 9 months to incubate and grow to the point where we could actually go out and pitch and raise money on it. And so those months in between were actually kind of hard. I had to go back to some freelancing. I actually joined another startup at one point for a couple months. So getting back to your question of, you know, how do I manage my own savings? How do you manage spending your own savings? It's a very tough one. I think that, you know, the thing I had in my back pocket being a freelancer prior to this is I could always fall back on that, right? Let me go pick up a contract and, you know, go make 10K or something to keep the business afloat. The second part of your question, at what point do you begin fundraising? Fundraising now is kind of unique. So when we raised money in 2009, I kind of said, you know, if you're going to raise funding, what you need to be is the local maximum. What I mean by that is a lot of the work in raising funding was kind of spidering your network to get intros to angel investors and figuring out, like, just get in front of them. Once you got in front of them, a lot of the work had already been, you know, that was a lot of the hard work. I mean, obviously, you still had to have a pitch, and I'll talk a little bit about that for a second, but that was a lot of the hard work. And so the goal was, if I could just be the best one, you know, the top 3 of the 15 pitches they see in this quarter or this funding cycle, then I'm probably good. Now that's different, right? So now things like AngelList have completely changed the game, and we raised actually some of our last round on AngelList, in that you can't just be the local maximum anymore. It's now easy to find investors. There's hundreds of them on AngelList, but it's also easy for them to find hundreds of startups to fund. So now you can't be the local maximum because there's hundreds of people raising money at any given time, and it's very clear who the top 5 guys are. So you're seeing, when you hear about really high valuations, it's not across the board. There's really high valuations because there's more money going into less companies now. And that's at an angel level, at a seed level, also I think at an institutional level. We just have less asymmetry, right? Which on the whole is a good thing, but it does have this adverse side effect for raising money. So you should be, all that to say, you should begin fundraising when you can actually presumably be one of those top 5 companies. And so what I look at is, what have you accomplished? What milestones have you already hit? What's the one, especially if you're raising seed funding, you need one good metric, right? And it's probably not a revenue metric. It's probably an engagement metric. It's probably like, hey, for every 10 people we get to the site, 8 of them are still around 10 weeks later. And of those 8, 6 of them come onto the site every day for 2 hours, right? Like most of the best seed pitches I've seen are around engagement, right? And so they have, they don't have scale, they don't have, doing this at tens of thousands of users. They either have engagement or they have some unique kind of customer acquisition model. So I think the point at which you fundraise is the point where you can credibly say, hey, we've got one great metric that's probably better than 98% of the people that are on, that you also might find on AngelList. But like I said, I think seed funding in a way is actually maybe a bit harder than it was a couple of years ago. Like I said, because it makes more money into less companies. So I'm seeing a lot of people really struggle to raise that seed funding because you can't just be a local maximum.